There we go. So where have we gone? We're up at the top. We've got questions down there. Okie dokie. Hi everybody, thanks so much for joining us this evening. I've just changed my screen and we now have a very large picture of ourselves, which is a little strange. But yeah, thank you for joining us on this session. And tonight we're going to talk all about digestive health. So some of you may have joined us on the last session and know who we are, but we'll do some introductions anyway. Just to let you know, this time we are recording the session. If you do want to ask any questions, still welcome to put questions in chat, but just be aware. In fact, I think with the recording, we don't actually see the chat. If you feel that you would prefer not to ask questions, given there is a recording, do feel free to message us, obviously afterwards or at any time. So we'll do some intros. So I'm Jo. I'm one of the nutritionists at Amaranth. We've got Zoe, who is waving at the moment. Do you want to introduce yourself, Zoe?
Yeah, so my name's Zoe. I'm also one of the nutritional therapists at Amaranth. Yeah, so I'm just working from home this evening, so I'm going to be answering any questions in the chat. So feel free to message me.
Yeah, and Zoe's one of the team that we do, that obviously does the consultations here, along with...
Hello, I'm Gemma, and yeah, I'm one of the other nutritional therapists that works at Amaranth. I'm in the shop Thursdays and Fridays, every other Saturday. So you can always find me here as well after this call to ask any other questions. But yeah.
So I'm aware that you know, some people who are joining are local to us here. We are Amaranth is a health shop, and also we're a team of nutritionists based in Bramall, but we do speak to people kind of right across the country. So this isn't kind of limited to people who can come into the store. We do clinics on Zoom. We do lots of sessions like this, and our whole philosophy really is just to share as much information as we can about health and nutrition. So if we can just start, I'll do a little bit of let you know what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to be talking about digestive health. Probably one of the biggest things that as nutritional therapists we see clients with. People come in with digestive symptoms. They might have lived with those symptoms for a long time, and you know, it can be constipation, it can be chronic diarrhea, it can be heartburn, lots of different digestive symptoms. And if you're struggling with those, you'll know what an impact that can have on quality of life. The other thing is that digestive health really comes into pretty much every consultation we do with our clients. Digestive health has a huge impact on other aspects of health. So when we see clients for skin, for hormones, for mood, even for weight management, we will always talk about digestive health, because as you'll realize as we talk through today, though all of those have a component that relates back to the gut, particularly the gut microbiome. So often by trying to rebalance the gut, we can see a big change in the severity of those other seemingly unrelated symptoms. So what we're going to try and cover off is, what is the digestive system? Why is it so important to our health? The gut microbiome, you've probably heard that term an awful lot recently. So we're going to try and tell you what it is, why it matters. We'll talk about a few of the common conditions of the digestive system, maybe focusing a little bit more on IBS, because often that's that diagnosis that people are not really quite sure what to do with. So hopefully we can help you a bit more with that. We'll talk about how foods can influence the digestive system. We'll talk about some supplements, and then we're going to cover off fermented foods, what they are, how you can include them in your diet, and finally, how you can test your microbiome. And I think that's something to bear in mind as we're going through all of this, and we're sort of talking about microbiome, what it means for health. Do bear in mind that there are means by which you can have that tested. You can really get some personalized information. If you've got any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Zoe's can be answering some of those as we go on, or alerting us to them. If they're quite personal and specific, it may be something that we get back to you on after this. And also, we do offer a number of services. So we offer full consultations with Gemma and Zoe. We do an initial free 15-20 minute review that can be helpful if you're taking supplements. You want to know whether they're the right ones for you. Also, if you're not really sure where to start, you don't know whether to do a certain test, you don't know what to do with regards to a consultation, we'll always do that free 15-20 minute chat with you. So let's start with, what is the digestive system? So the digestive system is quite a number of organs. And the whole role and purpose of the digestive system is to break food down into smaller and smaller components until those can be absorbed as nutrients, so as vitamins, minerals, fatty acids, and also to excrete the waste, so excrete the parts that we don't want. So those organs are, starting with the mouth, then it includes the liver, it includes the pancreas, the stomach, the intestines. You've also got your salivary glands as well there.
The gallbladder.
The gallbladder, yeah. So the health of all of those is important. So often we think of like the stomach and the gut, but actually, if you've got an imbalance in any of those, you may be struggling with digestive symptoms. And what you can find is that you can struggle with lots of different, with a different area of the digestive system, but the symptoms can be quite similar. So it can take quite a lot of investigation to find out what's actually happening. So the digestive system is critical. And as I mentioned, it's there to convert food into their simplest forms. So this is taking the glucose, taking the amino acids and the fatty acids and the vitamins and minerals from food. And of course, all of those help us live and breathe every day. They provide strength, they provide energy, they help all our cells to grow, they help create hormones, and they help our mood. So that's obviously critical. The other function of the digestive system is to clear waste. So this is taking out all of those toxins that either we breathe in, we ingest, or we take in from different places. They go through the liver. They then get bound to fibers in the digestive system so that we can excrete them. A sluggish digestive system may impair how we process and detoxify effectively. That also includes how we detoxify some of our hormones as well. We have a huge gut-brain connection. There is a nervous system within our gut that communicates with the central nervous system. We know that stress can trigger those feelings in the gut, that nervous stomach. And some people who struggle with IBS, stress is a huge component of that. But also, the gut produces these neurotransmitters. So something called serotonin, which is a feel-good neurotransmitter, huge amounts of that is produced in the gut. So if the gut's not regulated, we can see a big connection with mood. Finally, the immune system. So the gut is home to a high percentage of the body's immune cells. It could be as much as 80–90% of the immune cells. And more and more it's identified that it's not just affecting the immune conditions within the gut, but it's also potentially related to systemic infections and inflammation. So that's the gut function kind of overall. But over recent years, we've talked a lot more about the microbiome. So I'm going to hand over to Gemma, who is going to tell us exactly what the microbiome is and what it does, which is no easy job.
So yeah, the gut microbiome, it's an internal ecosystem that we have, and it's made up of diverse microorganisms that could be different bacteria, different viruses, different parasites and fungi. And scientists have realized over recent years that it's so crucial to our health that actually scientists now consider it another organ inside our body. And the presence of the right balance of these bacteria is fundamental to our health. We have trillions of bacteria in our bodies, billions in the gastrointestinal tract, all the way from the stomach through to the rectum. More bacteria in our body than there are people in the world. So that just shows how it's just so important. And when we think about our gut microbiome, we have to think of it as an ecosystem. So there's a lot of interactions between what lives in there and the environment that it's kind of kept in. And anytime things are changed within that environment, whether that's the species is affected by when we're using antibiotics, or an environmental factor like stress affects it, then it kind of ripples down through the entire chain in the microbiome and starts to cause problems. So that's why sometimes people can just be struggling for years. It dates back to something that's triggered it off a long time ago. So we kind of have to think of our microbiome as a garden. So it's teeming with diverse, colourful, different flora and plants. And when you're feeding your microbiome the right prebiotic foods, putting in some probiotic foods, maybe some aged fermented foods, which we'll get onto later, you're like a gardener. You're adding nutrient-rich soil, you're adding compost, you're adding fertilizer to help your plants grow and be strong. So that's kind of something we have to do all the time and be mindful of with our diet and lifestyle, really. Sometimes there are specific microorganisms that we can kind of pinpoint as the cause of a disease, food poisoning, salmonella, something like that. But more often it's an interplay between the person, how your immune system is behaving. So are you stressed, therefore your immune system's lower? Are you immune compromised? Or is there just generally an imbalance in the microbiome? So yeah, we as therapists, we work with the person to kind of really get to the bottom of what is out of balance, really. So when we think about the key parts of the microbiome, they're called the biotics. So there's the prebiotics, the probiotics, the postbiotics. So those are the three kind of key elements. So when we think about prebiotics, that's the fuel to feed your microbes. So we've got different microbes living in the gut, like lactobacillus, or just let somebody in. Lactobacillus, bifidobacterium, you might have heard of those, and they are really, really reliant on prebiotic fibers, things like onions, garlics, asparagus, coming from our diet to feed them, to help them thrive. And without that, we just can't have a healthy gut. Probiotics, so that's the live microbes, could actually be a beneficial yeast as well as a bacteria. And they benefit our health when either consumed in food or in a supplement form, whether it's either transiently as they pass through or growing and thriving, or whether it's the natural live microbes that we have within us that will have been with us since the very early days of our life. And then there is also postbiotics. So that's the kind of the probiotic afterlife. So when we either feed the bacteria that we've got within our guts, or we're putting a probiotic in, the bacteria feed on all those fibers and produce something called short chain fatty acids, which we'll come to explain what they are later, but they are really important for the health of our gut and the health of us in general. So they're a byproduct of feeding your good bacteria.
We don't really hear the term
postbiotics,
but I think we possibly will do.
Yeah, we're starting to hear a little bit more about it. There's 4 different kind of postbiotics. And at the moment in a supplement form, you tend to just get one of them, which is butyrate, but it's definitely becoming a more important area, I think. Yeah. So why is the microbiome important? Helps us produce energy. It actually helps to produce things like vitamin K2. And as Joe mentioned before, it helps to produce neurotransmitters like serotonin, one of our feel-good neurotransmitters. Helps us defend against pathogens. So whether that is on our, we have bacteria all over our skin and our skin microbiome. So on our hands when we're eating, on the food that we're digesting. So it's constantly helping to try, if we've got enough good bacteria, to have a strong resilience. The bacteria also help us digest our dietary fibers, and really give us a strong, robust immune system. So we think now we're like 90% of diseases can be linked to gut health. So sometimes if you just don't know where to go with your health, really working on the gut is a key kind of area. So yeah, that you'll hear the word come up maybe a bit more in this session, but dysbiosis. So that is the term for, I remember I first heard it at college and thought, never heard of that word. But dysbiosis is an imbalance really in the gut microbes. When it's out of kilter, things just don't work so well.
Mm-hmm. And just to, I guess, just to highlight a few other specific things that might resonate with you, some of the more recent research with regards to the gut microbiome, and some things it's been associated with. These are just examples. It's been associated with lots and lots of different things, but sleep. So there's been studies to show that first of all, sleep deprivation can lead to an alteration in that gut microbiome, but also studies that intervene in that by increasing and helping the balance of good bacteria have shown benefits in sleep problems. Hormones. So the microbiome is one of the key regulators of hormones, and it does this through regulating estrogen via an enzyme called beta glucuronidase, which always best not to try and say large words. But basically this breaks down the estrogens into their active form. So if that gut microbiome isn't working correctly, that can affect the balance of estrogen. And where we see estrogen conditions, we're thinking about things like PCOS, endometriosis, where that balance of estrogen isn't right in the body and it's not being detoxified in the way that we need it to be. Weight management is very much kind of an emerging area, but the microbiome we know does affect the energy balance, and that in turn affects how we utilize energy from the diet. So there's more research happening there, but potentially if we're not efficiently using that and if the microbiome isn't helping efficiently that energy balance, then potentially that's leading to some of the weight and obesity type conditions and some of those more metabolic disorders. And the skin, I know this is one that you've worked with a lot, Gemma, haven't you? But the relationship between the gut microbiome and the immune system can have a massive knock-on impact on the skin. And this is where we see those kind of immune affected skin conditions. So that might be like your eczema, your dermatitis, psoriasis. And I know you've done quite a lot of gut testing that's led to some really good improvements in the skin condition by testing that microbiome, by improving the microbiome, and then seeing a big difference alongside other things, of course. And you know, there's dietary changes, but those dietary changes in themselves are linking to that supportive of a healthy microbiome. So we're showing here that there's a critical role, you know, the digestive system and the microbiome has a massively critical role in health. So there are influences to that. So what influences what our microbiome is?
So what affects it? I mean, it really starts with the day you're born. Whether you were a vaginal birth or a C-section. Vaginal birth, as you're coming out of the birth canal, you pick up a lot of bacteria from your mother on the way out, whereas it's different with a C-section. Whether you were breastfed or not to say that either way is the right way, but it actually does prosper different bacteria. Ethnicity and culture, that affects it, where you're growing up, the types of food you might be eating and exposed to, your place of habitat. Is it out in the countryside? Is it, which, you know, you sometimes you think that's healthy, but obviously there's also pesticides being sprayed around, or living in a city with the pollutants which can affect it, or different countries where you'd consume perhaps different foods. Exposure to animals, so if you had pets as a child, that can be good. Exposure to green space, or as a child playing out in the soil, things like that. Sources of food, do you tend to buy supermarket or do you tend to buy more organic? Because the organic is likely to have a more, you know, when you buy sometimes carrots that are still covered in the soil, or the potatoes, and you know, you might not scrub that off as well, you can actually get the benefits of that. How much, going back again as far to weaning days, how much diverse plant fibers have you eaten across the years? And again, that kind of includes consumption of polyphenols, which we'll cover off slightly later, but polyphenols are a property within certain plants, particularly berries, that is very good for your gut bacteria. different diets affect it. So how much fat you have in your diet, how much protein, how much carbs, different approaches to your preferred diet, if you're going to follow one, can also affect the growth of certain bacteria. Exposure to antibiotics and antimicrobial drugs could even be things like anti-malaria drugs. You know, they can be an antibiotic as well. Whether that's either directly that you've taken antibiotics over your life for a number of conditions, or whether it is through our water supply and in the food chain as well, we can pick them up that way. Pesticides on foods and emulsifiers and additives that are added now to most ultra processed foods. So some of it may encourage growth of some of it may discourage, some of it might, it just all has an impact.
I think we said this in the last session, so many of those things are related to kind of modern lifestyle, and it's kind of, if we could all just go back to spending more time inside, getting food from the farm, getting food from the farm, we just, everything's just become processed. It's sprayed with things to grow bigger, and it's just not helping our microbiome and diversity.
It does not. Yeah. So when you think about a standard Western diet, maybe higher in saturated fat, maybe higher in cheap quality meats, maybe lots of sugar, whether that is kind of added sugar or just a lot of grains-based sugars. Lots of refined foods that have been stripped of the fiber, emulsifiers, as we said, and then, you know, low in omega-3 fatty acids, low in the polyphenols, low in resistant starches, which is what you get in like cooled rice and potatoes, and low in fermented foods. All of them increase your risk of having lower bacterial diversity and a higher chance of having what we call more pro-inflammatory bacteria. So certain bacteria, they release kind of byproducts, and it creates inflammation within the gut, which can obviously be a big driver of symptoms. And if you haven't got enough of the gut bacteria, then you don't produce those short chain fatty acids that we mentioned before that are so important. And you're more likely, if you don't produce those short chain fatty acids, to have more degrading of your mucous membrane within the gut, and that causes something called leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability, which Joe briefly touched on when we think about skin conditions, because the more permeability there is, the more chatter there is between kind of bacterial toxins, food proteins in the gut passing through into the bloodstream where the immune system lives, and then you're going to get more potential for like reactions on the skin, food intolerances, etc. So when we just briefly, when we think about different diets, like high fat ketogenic diet, very much a thing of the now, to helpful for weight loss, and, you know, getting blood sugar under control, reversing type 2 diabetes, etc. But is it the long-term solution? Because obviously it decreases your carbohydrate intake a lot, which strips back your fiber intake a lot. And the research is showing that you can end up with a reduced abundance of some of the really key important bacteria for all of those things we've talked about, and actually an increase in certain bacteria that can cause things like loose stools, SIBO, rotten smelling gas, which you just don't really want. So maybe, you know, short term, great, but as a long-term approach, that the research there isn't looking so great. FODMAP diets as well might be something you've heard of if you've been struggling for IBS. It's often something on the NHS that is recommended by dietitians. And sometimes we might do that here as well. But it should be a short-term approach. So FODMAP is stands for fermentable oligo, mono and polysaccharides, which are all different types of fiber that can be fermented if the gut bacteria is out of balance. So on the FODMAP diet, you reduce down your intake of those foods, and a lot of people do find some symptom relief in that. They have less gas, less bloating, but long term, it's not going to fix that imbalance in the bacteria that is there, and actually you're just long term going to end up with potentially lower numbers. So it needs to be a short term approach that is right for the individual, depending on what gut condition they have.
But then with very much a kind of supported plan as to what to do.
And during that time, if you are reducing, like what foods can you still keep in that could still potentially support and nourish that microbiome, or other things, you know, reducing stress and the other aspects that can support it.
Yeah, and then I think it's a challenge overall. And when we talk a bit more about dietary things, when somebody is struggling with digestion, you know, it's all well and good us coming up with this great plan with lots and lots of plant-based foods. That can be difficult for people, particularly at first. And that's why, you know, working with somebody to understand what to introduce, how to introduce them, maybe using some supplements to help boost that beneficial bacteria to start with and the microbiome. You can't always just go from having these digestive symptoms to putting in a whole load of fibre straight away. You have to be careful, particularly as well with things like prebiotics. So before we talk a little bit more about the nutrition diet side of things and supplements, I'll just do a quick overview of some common conditions of the digestive system. And the thing with these is often, as we go through them, you'll realize that the symptoms are often very, very similar. So it can be quite hard to get a diagnosis and work out exactly what's causing the symptoms. And that's really what we aim to do, particularly in the case of many of you may have been told that you have IBS. And IBS is a collection of symptoms, which can be anything including bloating, pain, it can be constipation, diarrhea, and those symptoms, it's basically diagnosed as IBS when the consultant or the GP has ruled out other digestive conditions. So that can leave you thinking, well, what on earth does that mean? So Gemma's going to explain a little bit about the different types of IBS as well, because I think we would take IBS, we're not GPs, we're not here to diagnose you with anything, but what we are here to do is say, well, actually, what could the contributing factors be? IBS isn't just one thing, and usually, well, always there is something that's triggering it. We just have to try and investigate and find out what that might be. So in terms of digestive conditions, there's a few different ones to consider. So you've got, first of all, your inflammatory bowel conditions. So this includes Crohn's, inflammatory bowel disease, diverticulitis. Symptoms of these will be pain, acute diarrhea. Many of them come with flare-ups, so it can be calmer for a while, but then have these phases of flare-ups. Usually, if you've got one of these conditions, it will be diagnosed, and it'll be diagnosed through the consultants. And a lot of this is related to that intestinal barrier, and there's a lot of inflammation that's causing inflammation, permeability, and therefore your body's kind of reacting to that. This is particularly where we have to go careful on dietary strategies. You know, this isn't with some of these conditions, just increasing lots of fibre at once isn't always sensible, but what we definitely do need to do is look at trying to build that healthy microbiome, because we know that the microbiome has a role with balancing inflammation. So IBS, as I've mentioned, which we're going to talk about in a lot more detail, but symptoms of that, they're constipation, diarrhea, bloating, pain, and then we'll go on to what we work with regards to that, and hopefully give some helpful information. Reflux as well. So reflux is interesting, and that is that symptom of heartburn. Now, an approach for that often from the GP is antacids, and maybe again this is something that needs to be considered more in the short term, because there's more and more information coming through now to show that reducing down stomach acid for the long term probably isn't the right thing to do. So your stomach acid has a role in breaking your food down. It's a critical part of your digestive system. So if we take that away, that is leaving a more opportunistic environment for perhaps some of those more harmful bacteria to take hold. So I think, like I say, we're not GPs, and that's not our job. But if you've been on long-term antacids, then it might be a question just to ask, should I still be on these? There's almost an alternative approach, which is to say a lot of people get symptoms of heartburn because they don't have enough stomach acid. So you need stomach acid to break food down. And you also need the enzymes to break food down. If you're lacking in either of those, you can create this kind of reflux pattern. So it's complete opposite, but it's an interesting consideration. And then SIBO, which is being talked about a lot more at the moment. And SIBO really is potentially kind of one of the IBS types, I guess, because it's not yet very well tested. But SIBO is where there's excessive bacteria of the wrong type in the small intestine.
And in the wrong place.
And in the wrong place, yeah.
Wrong type and wrong place.
So that means it's kind of fermenting, and where it's fermenting, it's producing gas, and that brings the nausea, that brings diarrhea again, and that brings more gas. So you've still got all those IBS type symptoms, but from a slightly different
sometimes it could be a bit
cause.
of burping, couldn't it, as well?
Yeah.
Gas coming up as well.
Yeah, but lots of that bloating and pain. Now it is being tested a little bit more in the NHS, and you and Zoe can certainly do tests for SIBO. So that would be potentially part of a consultation approach where you have a chat in advance and then work out which testing pathway to go down. Can be quite a tricky one to work with, but the root of everything is getting a balance in the microbiome. So like I say, we're going to focus a little bit more on IBS and those potential different types.
So as we said, IBS is often a catch-all diagnosis, and people are often left to just kind of figure it out and how to manage these symptoms on their own. Trial and error approach, restricted diets, maybe some medications, antacids or Duculat. Whatever the medications are called. So, but yeah, we work with clients on one-to-one basis to really get to the bottom of what is causing their digestive discomfort, and then we'll work with dietary changes, lifestyle, and supplements. And often one approach doesn't work for another. So in those consultations, we really do, look at the individual and work with them holistically. So yeah, when we think about, it's important for us when we work with clients to work out what is their IBS. Like, I mean, some people may have multiple drivers, but they can kind of be categorized. So if we just give you kind of a brief overview. So you've got stress-related IBS. So our gut and our brain is linked by nerves, which kind of create a highway that works both ways. So, you get that gut feel, but also if you're feeling stressed and overwhelmed or rushed, you can also very much feel it in your gut. And it's a bit of a circle that continues, that feedback continues. So it can be a frustrating answer, if you go to the GP and they say, well, are you stressed? And you think, it's not that, it's something else. But actually, it really, really can play a part, because when we are stressed, we don't produce the right digestive enzymes. We might not produce the right stomach acid. We might be stressed because we're busy and eating on the go and not chewing our food. So then we're not breaking it down as well. But also stress has this very big detrimental impact on the bacteria. So it is a really big, important thing to consider. And also having IBS is a stress. So again, it's this kind of cycle. Now, obviously, we talk to clients about how can they manage the stress. So if it's overwhelm, then it is meditation, it is breath work, it is taking that time out, it is slowing down. If it's maybe feelings of stress and anger, it might be going to the gym, but it's trying to understand which approach is right for you. Is it feeling exhausted? Maybe you need to rest, or take a yin yoga class or something like that. We do, or go for a walk in nature, or dance it out, like whatever it might be. But there is different approaches for different people, or talking therapy. But we do also have many botanicals or nutrients that we use to help people manage their stress response as well. So things like magnesium can be a really great mineral for helping to support the nervous system. It helps to helps to calm, helps to increase GABA in the body, which is one of our calming neurotransmitters, as does things like valerian, reishi mushroom, things like ashwagandha, which is a great herb for kind of calming our cortisol levels, which is one of our stress hormone. So lots of options to kind of support there, but also specifically around the gut-brain axis, there are probiotics which have been extensively kind of researched in humans for their effect on mood, mood imbalances such as anxiety and depression. So In Vivo are a company we work with who are fantastic for their knowledge on the microbiomes, gut microbiome, skin microbiome, urinary microbiome, and they have different products to support the different areas that you need, that would decided that a client would need help with. So yeah, their mind and mood is a really great probiotic blend for specifically kind of anxiety or something. Then you've got digestive enzyme related IBS. Now, like I said, stress could impact the digestive enzyme capacity, so you could easily have both. But as Joe touched on, we have the stomach acid, we have digestive enzymes to break down our food, so that when it passes down, there's less kind of undigested food around for the bacteria to kind of feast on and ferment and create that bloating. And also, if it's not broken down as well, you're more likely to get food intolerances passing through into the bloodstream. So yeah, stress, also nutrient deficiencies, like we need zinc for good stomach acid. We need enough protein to make some of the enzymes. Other conditions such as diabetes can have an effect here as well. So, you can do things like we said, the lifestyle, the stress, the chewing, cooking your food from scratch, herbs, spices that really stimulate those salivary enzymes to get going. You can do things like, if you struggle with heavier meals, like evening meals and things, you can, to increase your stomach acid levels, you could use something like apple cider vinegar before a meal, just a little bit, or even just lemon in water. That can kind of give that more acidic environment in the stomach, which can help.
And is that apple cider vinegar with the mother? Is that the kind of enzyme part, the cloudy bit?
Yeah, the cloudy bit that lurks at the bottom of the apple cider vinegar bottle is the good bit. But also with many customers, we use digestive enzyme supplements. So Terra Nova do a really great one, Viridian do one with actually a little bit of stomach acid in. So they just really help to booster our ability to break down that food to improve the situation. Then we've got kind of digestive spasm related IBS. So that is where the gut wall is contracting too often. So think diarrhea, loose stools, people with IBS can be just incapacitated, can't leave the house. It's relentless. And obviously it can also be the opposite. You could have the constipation side, but where those excessive movements can be to do with stress, it can be to do with tension, it can be to do with too much fiber and sensitivity, or it could be to do with, I suppose, an issue in the bowel itself, like a hypermobility syndrome or something. But there's a lot of herbs that we can use to soothe that digestion. So peppermint oil is very good for helping to kind of break down gas. Fennel, you can either chew them or drink as a tea. Lemon balm, chamomile, ginger, all really kind of calming teas that you can cook with or have brewed into a tea.
Nikki Hill's got a nice digestive loose tea, hasn't she?
Yeah.
And that's got like literally all of those
Peppermint and licorice, and really nice.
That's a nice one for sort of just after meals, really.
And we never want to drink kind of too much after meals to dilute, but I think herbal teas, that warm process, the warm drink as well, is much better than a glass of cold water in there.
Mm-hmm.
Dysbiosis, there's that word that I said you never heard of, but you have now. So this is probably I think the most common one that we help people with. The other ones play into it, but I think the majority of it is driven by this. So yeah, as we've touched on, it's all about the bacteria balance in there. How much of the good, how much of the bacteria is overgrown, and what is the state of that balance, and are people eating a diverse diet that is going to support that? So we work again with encouraging that gentle introduction of more prebiotics, foods, fermented foods in there to really kind of get on top of encouraging that growth. Sometimes we have to use antimicrobial herbs, and that can be things like oregano, garlic, grapefruit seed extract. Yeah, there's a selection of herbs. That wormwood is another one that we can use to reduce down any overgrowth. So if we feel like somebody says to us, but I eat a really diverse diet, and we're kind of thinking, there's something more, we may do testing with them, and then we would really find out whether we need to use those antimicrobials or whether we need to focus more on growing the commensals, and which maybe prebiotic supplement we might want to use. So that's a type of fiber to support that growth. So I think, and obviously specific probiotic strains that we can put in. Again, if we've done testing targeted to those missing microbes, like sometimes we find on tests that people literally have no growth whatsoever. Lactobacillus has gone extinct. They don't have any. So it doesn't matter how much prebiotic fiber you're putting in. If it's not there to begin with, there's nothing to grow. So, that's a bad state, but it can happen, with the lives we now lead. So it's definitely about, I think, doing both probiotics that have that transient effect and the prebiotics. So yeah, that's that one. Food intolerance, IBS. That's, as we said, sometimes you can have a direct intolerance to lactose. So that is the sugar in dairy. We can again test for intolerance to lactose. But it's usually, I would say, quite apparent if that's the case, the loose stools after consuming milk or cheese or ice cream. Some people have an intolerance, quite a strong intolerance to caffeine. They find that quite a laxative. Or the more of the kind of the fibrous foods really cause them problems. Or fatty foods, again, if you've got any issues, if you've had your gallbladder removed, any issues with not producing enough bile, or poor bile flow, that can really affect your ability to digest fatty foods.
Yeah, we didn't cover that in the earlier sections actually, but I think that's again one thing that we do see people coming in with. They've had their gallbladder removed, but perhaps are not as aware that means from that point on your gallbladder is your bile storage, which should contract when you eat a fatty meal. So once that gallbladder's been removed, you've got this kind of steady stream of bile, but you will struggle more. It's likely you'll struggle more when you have a richer fatty meal, because you just don't have the ability to break that down in the same way.
Yeah. And with the food intolerances, keeping a food diary and removing foods can be a really helpful solution. But we do work with many people on what we call IgG food intolerance testing, which is a finger prick blood testing to identify if any food proteins are passing through the leaky gut wall into the bloodstream and triggering an immune response. So, that can go on to cause things like joint pain, skin conditions and things. So, often we see great results with people removing certain foods. But again, with that, it doesn't want to be the long-term solution, because the food isn't the problem. The problem is the microbiome is out of balance, and therefore there's not the short-chain fatty acids to keep the gut wall strong. So therefore there's too much chatter between the gut and the immune system. So it all comes back to the gut microbiome.
And I think on the testing, I probably speak for all three of us here, but when we do the testing, you can see those indications of leaky gut, because when you get a test that's coming back lots and lots of those low level intolerances, and potentially to things people eat an awful lot of, it's a sign that the body's responding because of those, because of that intestinal permeability. So exactly what Gemma's saying, we're not looking necessarily at going, right, we're going to remove all of those foods. And
sometimes when we do stool testing as well, we see overgrowths of certain bacteria that are at normal levels, what we call pathobiont, so they're okay as long as we've got enough good bacteria, but they can become pathogenic and they start to degrade the mucosal membrane. They kind of eat away at it. So as well as not having enough good to keep it strong, you've got overgrowth of bad bacteria that are having a good munch and making it worse.
And I think we talked about food intolerance testing there, and I think it's just really sort of key to, if you're doing anything like food intolerance testing or even gut microbiome testing, make sure you do it through somebody who's going to give you some good advice as to what to actually do with those results. What you don't want to do is get a printout of a whole load of food intolerances, start taking them all out, but really not have a clue as to when you're going to introduce them, because as Gemma said, it's not normally the food that's the problem. So you take that food out, you introduce an abundance of something else as a replacement, there's a pretty good chance that that's something else you'll then start to react in with. So the food intolerances have to come along with a plan as to what to do with that. Okay, so we've talked a lot there about conditions, and obviously covering in that some of the supplements, some of the food. But I think if we just do a bit of a summary now to hopefully give some information and some more practical advice as to the kind of foods that you are wanting to introduce in your diet. And everything is about taking things at a step at a time. I think on things like this, we always trying to give like all the information, but it's not expected to do everything at once. Just take everything a step at a time, make one change, make small changes, but it's to give you kind of ideas, and you can pick ones that resonate with you. So just kind of a summary of how foods will influence the digestive system and the microbiome. So the types of foods that we want to include. So we definitely want to include these prebiotic foods. So the prebiotic are these polysaccharide sugars that are metabolized or fermented by the gut microbiome. They're a class of fibers, and they'll have a beneficial effect on kind of producing that good bacteria. So it's your food really for the good bacteria. And we get that through food, and we get that through fiber. The modern diet doesn't usually have a huge amount of fiber. So Western countries like the UK, our average fiber intake is about 20 grams a day. The government recommendation is about 30 grams a day. But an example here is a hunter-gatherer tribe in Tanzania. They eat between about 80 and 150 grams of fiber a day. And probably if we went back to 100 years or whatever here, we ate a lot more fiber, because we ate the food that we got from the soil. We ate the food that was there for us. And that was the only choice we had. We didn't have processed diet. We didn't have special kids meals. We didn't have all of that stuff that you could get me onto again, and I'll have a good whole rant about.
And foraging, like, if you go back more than 100 years, but, tribes and hunter-gatherers and stuff, it's going out and it's eating all of those different herbs and leaves and greeneries and stuff. So,
yeah, I mean, it would be so different if like bacteria was tested from, people who are now 100 now. If we were able to test their bacteria when they're in the 20s and compare it with a 20-year-old now, it would be very, very
and antibiotics
different.
Didn't exist then. So
yeah. Anyway, so yeah, the more diverse the species and the fiber and the prebiotics, we're going to get more and more benefits from that. So in terms of finding prebiotics in food, we're looking at getting those from dietary soluble fiber. You might have heard of things like FOS. You've got FOS and GOS and OX. But what that means in terms of food,
inulin, as another key one.
Yeah,
your inulin bag.
So you can buy you can buy this inulin, which is a powder that you can put in. Often comes from chicory, but you can also get key foods that contain prebiotics. So onions, leeks, garlic, Jerusalem, artichokes, dandelion greens, your pulses. So I think every time we speak, we talk about increasing more pulses in the diet. Lentils, peas, you're looking at your whole grains that are really rich in fiber. So that's oats, that's millet, that's rye. Potato, interestingly, so potato doesn't always come up as a as kind of high on dietary patterns, but it's a natural food. So if it's been cooked and cooled, particularly, it's got that prebiotic, because that's the starch that's providing that prebiotic. Chicory, like I said, cognac root and corn cobs are a few others, and banana, and banana,
but not when it's particularly ripe.
And then there's a few non-carbohydrate sources, and these are to do with that coloured pigment that you've got in the plants, because this is your polyphenols. So the polyphenols are providing some of that prebiotic, and that's all your berries, so your cranberry, your Ariona, your blueberry. You've also got some really good polyphenols in coffee. So coffee does come up as a really kind of positive, and actually coffee is one of your fermented foods to a certain extent, but try and choose an organic coffee. And I obviously there's reasons not to have coffee later in the day, and it's stimulant, etc. But you know, 1 or 2 cups of a good coffee is a good thing. Cacao, so again, lots and lots of reasons as to why we can put some raw cacao into our foods. Pomegranates, red grapes, so think of those kind of really deep coloured
Purple sweet
things,
potato,
really. Yeah.
purple carrots, yeah, purple broccoli.
And there are some studies to show that particularly those polyphenols that come in those foods I was just talking about can increase the numbers of bifidobacterium and lactobacilli, and those are your 2 main strains really, and also reduce the number of pathogens. So yeah, trying to just incorporate all of those things in the diet.
Again,
So,
in Vivo they do a really nice kind of polypheno and prebiotic food type supplement. So if you're struggling in busy life but you want something that's going to give you good levels of those, they've got a product that's got a really nice blend in as well. So yeah, when we think about how can we do these dietary changes to boost the microbiome, obviously we want to think about food that comes from the land or from the water. So real whole foods wherever possible. The more processed food, the more likely it is that it's going to be lower in fiber and have things like sweeteners in, which will affect the gut bacteria. So we really want to think about diversity if possible. We were thinking like 30 a week, so that can be herbs, spices, nuts, seeds, beans, legumes, fruits, vegetables. So when you think about ideally, 7 to 10 every single day, but across your week, you wanted to look at getting a diverse selection that takes you up to 30. So it can just be worth jotting down over your last week and see whether you've got anywhere near that. Often I find with clients, maybe 5 or 6 might come in an evening meal, and the rushed lunch and breakfast might not be so great. If you can spread it out, wonderful. But if you can't, that's okay. Got to work around what you can do.
Frozen, can't you? So frozen, tinned. It doesn't have to always be that thought of cooking the meal from scratch and having the fresh ingredients in the house.
Yeah, and the rainbow of colours, that is another thing to consider. So as well as looking at the number and the different diversities, looking at the colours that are available. So that can be where things like Veg Box, I get one from Grew Box, which is an organic farm in Lim, set up by a small family, and they're great. The Veg Boxes come now, you can tailor it slightly, if you don't like certain things, but it usually is so diverse in the colour when it comes. And it comes with the mud still on, and that it's all organic and just really, really good. Like I said, herbs and spices do count. Considering the dirty dozen, so that's something that we look at with pesticide. How much there are certain fruits and vegetables that, unfortunately, to help them grow in the climates and at the speed that the farmers need to turn things over, certain plants get sprayed a lot more than others. So you can look at the thing called the dirty dozen, and that will help you to decide, on ones that you might want to buy organic, because it is so expensive to buy organic now. Like Joe said, frozen berries, great. I just have bags of those in the freezer: blueberries, cherries, raspberries, strawberries, currants, and then you can just pop them into your smoothies, on top of pancakes, into your porridge. Also, we sell a selection that we have like freeze-dried berry powders, and they can be a really good, what we call antioxidant boost to the body as well.
And a lot of those are organic as well, so that is one way of getting organic in. And you sort of put in a teaspoon or whatever in your smoothie, but it gives you another one of those varieties of fruit and veg.
We've talked about the cooled starchy plants. That can be really handy. Like in a busy week, make up some new potatoes or something, and make up a little salad on a Sunday to have in the fridge for the week, like new potatoes, chives, kind of mayonnaise, or again a rice salad. Cook a big batch of that, and then add some sweet corn, some cucumbers, some tomatoes, some spring onions, and have a nice rice salad that you can kind of add to your meals throughout the week. Always, if possible, go for the whole grain option. When you maybe if you go for like a sourdough bread, go for the wholemeal seeded, or make switches from white rice to brown rice, or red rice is really, really nice. vary up your flours that you might use. If you do any baking or you cook, you could try spelt, you can try rye, there's einkorn, all have slightly different nuttier tastes and things. If you're not overly sensitive to skin on fruit, that's another way. You know, don't peel them, keep the skin on. That adds to your fibre. I think that's probably about it, isn't it?
Yeah,
Think about.
I think the thing is just getting your nuts and seeds in as
Oh, yeah,
well.
nuts and-
So
yeah.
you can think about different ways to do that. Blend them up, sprinkle them over things, add them to your muesli, add them to your porridge,
Yeah.
add them over salads. Nuts and seeds are a great thing just to be snacking on during the day.
And think about this, I suppose those little ones, like you said, coffee and dark chocolate, you know, go for the good quality, the best brands of dark chocolate. Or I use an Exhale coffee, which is really super rich in polyphenols and will really support your gut bacteria. So yeah, just do a bit of homework around. But again, you know, we can advise on those kind of things.
Absolutely. So just to do, I guess, a summary on supplements, we've talked about supplements quite a bit as we've gone through. So probably a lot of this is just really recapping on supplements, but the main supplement groups that you might want to consider. So start with those prebiotics that we talked about. There's a lot of research for them in human trials, human clinical trials, for issues like constipation, diarrhea, IBS. So there's those prebiotic types of fiber. We showed the inulin earlier, and then you can also get specific supplements of there's something called PHGG, there's GOS, and you and Zoe would be able to advise on specific ones.
PHGG is often quite a good one to go with because it's actually low FODMAP. So if anybody is at the early stages of starting to get on top of their IBS condition, then or you know, whatever the other digestive condition is that they have. But yeah, PHGG is usually very well tolerated by everybody. GOS as well is also shown really well in skin studies, eczema, psoriasis. Inulin is just a great all-rounder feeds. But again, if you do stool testing and we know what you're lacking in, then we can tailor the prebiotics as well, because like I said, some of them do feed certain bacteria.
And the nice thing with the prebiotics is they often kind of they dissolve quite well, but they also taste quite sweet, don't they? So they're not things that are difficult to take. I mean, some people even use some natural health products will use inulin as a natural sweetener. So they are really easy to use.
I pop it in my coffee in the morning, I'll put it in my porridge or overnight oats or in my smoothie. It's just easy, and you know, straight away you're getting 5 grams of fiber in a teaspoon there at the start of your day, as well as anything else you're getting in your breakfast meal.
So probiotics, we could talk about the different types of probiotics probably for another session of an hour or so. These are the actual live microbes. The testing that we keep talking about will show which of these good bacteria we've got, that then we can supplement in lots and lots of different forms, in liquids, in powders, in capsules. So do you want to just maybe cover off some of them? But I guess we could be here for could be here till midnight if we start going through all different types of probiotics.
I mean, essentially when you're taking a probiotic, you're kind of adding more team players into that microbiome, really. And you know, we've got things from 2 billion up to 120 billion. We have probiotics that you can suck as a lozenge, so starting in the oral microbiome. You know, if you've got any kind of gum issues or dental issues, you know, you can really start there, and then you can swallow them down. So there's kind of different ways and different approaches, but the probiotics can almost have like an antimicrobial effect as well. They produce a substance that it works in a way a bit like an antibiotic. I mean, it's not going to be as kind of strong as that would be, and obviously antibiotics have their place when they're needed. But Lactobacillus acidophilus is a strain of probiotic, and it's known to produce a substance called acidophilin, and that really supports the immune system. So you know, that could just be a great one to take over the winter as well. Saccharomyces boulardii is actually a beneficial yeast. We use that a lot with clients, don't we, who are maybe have very they've had antibiotics and they've really unsettled gut and they've got diarrhea that won't kind of resolve, or they've been traveling and they've got traveler's diarrhea, or they've had food poisoning that just won't settle. So that can be a really effective probiotic. Lactobacillus rhamnosus GG as well, that can also support that, but Lactobacillus GG is also shown to be very effective for allergies, eczeema, asthma, those type of conditions.
And we're not going to do a test on this at the end, are we? Because
no. So again, yeah, testing, we would then know, and then we could tailor it. But yeah, lots of different ones. So if you come in with whatever condition you're struggling with, we can tailor it. But you know, like this one, for example, this is our strongest one, 120 billion in there, 35 different strains. So sometimes without any testing, you might just want to take a really broad spectrum, really high dose. There is also some prebiotics in here, so you're kind of covering a lot of ground with something like this. We always say kind of take first thing in the morning, maybe, you know, it's an empty stomach, there's not really stomach acid around. Hopefully as many of the bacteria as possible will survive and get down to where you want it to be and do their job. So yeah.
And then other supplements which we've really touched on, but just as a summary, so digestive enzymes, so stress, or if for some reason the pancreas function is struggling, then you can take supplements with specific enzymes in. So amylase, lipase, protease, they'll break down your carbohydrates, your fats and your protein, which means that they go into that lower digestive system in the smaller components, so they're not going to ferment so much in the intestine. HCl, which is your stomach acid, you can supplement with that, and that's one that's worth trying to work with if you are having that reflux. And it's if you do get more burning, obviously it's not the right thing for you, but it is one that certainly can have almost sometimes a reverse effect than you would have thought, because those symptoms being due to low stomach acid. And then we do also look at liver support. So things like artichoke, for example, is helpful to support that breakdown, also potentially the fat breakdown and bile production. So liver support is also helpful.
Just briefly before as well, just something like UTIs as well. So the lactobacillus species, they kind of dominate the urogenital flora of healthy women. So really help using probiotics going though via the gut, and then they translocate, can really help to kind of restore the right balance there. And it can be a particular problem post-menopausally, can't it, as well? So and constipation as well, bifidobacterium. You know, if you've got the right amount of fiber, the right amount of healthy fats, right amount of water, and it's still a problem, bifido can be a good strain for that. I just wanted to mention those.
Yeah.
And then
so nearly there.
Yeah.
So if you've stayed with us this long, thank you. By the way, if you do have any questions, I know we're kind of like talking away in our own running through things, but obviously do put any questions. I didn't mention before, we have a live studio audience tonight as well, so if we get any questions, that's why every now and again I've looked over. So if we get any questions, we will go through those, but you know where we are to contact us afterwards. So we're just going to talk a little bit more, and I'm aware of time here, but just tell you a little bit about fermented foods. You might have heard of them, you might want to know which each of them are, how you can use them. So we'll tell you a little bit about fermented foods, and then just really finish off with just a little bit more information on the testing. So
many cultures around the world use fermented foods. You know, before fridges, like people had to ferment, and they buried their foods, didn't they, underground, under their house, like anywhere that was cold, like you know, putting things in jars and stuff. So, but now obviously we don't tend to do that, but you can buy things like pickles and olives and you know, other kind of fermented chutneys, things like that. They can be quite commonly available. We have in our shop in the fridge things called sauerkraut or kimchi. So that is like a fermented cabbage. So sauerkraut is fermented white cabbage, but you can also have it as fermented red cabbage. So basically it's just the cabbage chopped up, put into a glass jar with some water and salt, and then the natural bacteria and yeasts in the air start to work in conjunction with the fibers in the food, and over time ferment it. And so therefore when you eat it, you've got the prebiotics and the probiotics. So kimchi is a version of sauerkraut, but with kind of carrot added in and lots of spices. It's quite a fiery, hot. You know, they're great to have. You can have them just as a little side accompaniment with your meal, in like sandwiches or in a toasty or in a wrap, or, you know, however you want to consume them, really. Yeah, with eggs, all kinds of variants, really. Kombucha is a drink which can be a really great alternative for anybody that kind of feels like mid-afternoon they want a Diet Coke, like something sparkling, fizzy. Like I love an afternoon kombucha here now, don't I? Always go.
And I go for a good quality coffee.
Yeah.
So we're both getting our fermented food.
So yeah, in the afternoon, it's like, it's just a nice pick me up. So again, it's green tea, which has had what you call a SCOBY. So that is a collection of bacteria added into it and some sugar. And it is left to ferment, and the fermentation process makes the green tea sparkling. And by the end of that process, the bacteria has eaten all the sugar, so there's no sugar left. So a lot of companies now, if you know, some people aren't keen on the taste of green tea, so they flavor them. So there'll be natural blueberry or raspberry, lavender. We've got all kinds of flavors. So they could be a really, really great drink. Or to take out. We did a kombucha cocktail, didn't we, at the one of our store events. So kefir, that is a kind of similar to Greek yogurt or natural yogurt, but it's just slightly different collection of ancient grains.
More kind of tangy taste.
Yeah, a bit more tangy. Yeah. You've got sourdough, obviously. I mean, be careful. Like that's something really dangerous. But like supermarket sourdoughs, they often say they're a sourdough. Often they aren't. Often they are still just regular kind of commercial bread that's used a commercial yeast, and they've just added in a sourdough culture to give it the taste. They haven't actually made it in the kind of using a real sourdough culture to ferment and help the dough to rise, which takes like 48 hours. So for anybody local to us, Marjo's over the road does fantastic sourdough. But yeah, any good bakery.
And it's so good that a good bread is good for you, because I think when I was doing my nutrition training, which probably was about 15 years ago, it was that whole world of you don't have bread, you don't have gluten. And actually, luckily, we've kind of learned a lot more from there. And we've learned that actually the big problem there is the processed bread, and it's the sugars that go into bread, and it's all of those things. It's not necessarily gluten. And also some people who are gluten intolerant can tolerate a good quality sourdough. I'm not saying handmade, but made in a bakery that's been made properly in traditional ways. But
we might be as part of our consultations that we do, you know, if somebody, we did some testing and we thought, there is a real leaky gut element going on here, you know, the gluten can potentially exacerbate that. So we may say, let's for a while do a gluten-free approach, or if there's an autoimmunity, we may do that. So again, it's very individual. Miso and tempeh, they are from the soybean. So like a fermented tempeh is a fermented tofu. So you can use it in stir fries and things.
It's harder than tofu, often, isn't it?
It's like the little beans all joined together into little blocks. But that can be quite nice in a stir fry. You can make
little, like, if you just lightly fry it, you can make little tempeh burgers.
And then miso you often find in soup. So, you know, look, definitely. And then aged cheeses as well, like Parmesan is a good option. So yeah, lots of ways to kind of get those extra friendly good guys in.
Fabulous.
And then the last bit was just about testing, and we've kind of touched on it on and off throughout the session. So yeah, the stool testing we tend to do now is through in vivo. Just that, you know, there's a really, really informative company, and their tests is really, really great at getting to the bottom of what's going on. Now, you might find that your GP has done some stool testing, and that's always good to get done what you can through them, but often it's only kind of specific, maybe like food poisoning pathogens that they might test for, inflammation markers they might look for a kind of colitis or Crohn's.
H. pylori.
H. pylori bacteria, yeah, potentially, which lives in our stomach, which can be really hard and stubborn to get rid of, or possibly like blood in stool, so cancer markers. Whereas we're kind of doing markers that are more associated with overall health, chronic diseases. So the stool test we do looks at your good bacteria, how much diversity have you got, your levels of them, pathogenic bacterias, overgrowth of yeast, parasites, and viruses. And there is even a more comprehensive one, which also looks at things like your bile acids, your digestive enzymes, your leaky gut markers, your immune markers and things. So there's lots of places to go with it. So yeah.
And that just allows that kind of treatment plan accordingly to be really targeted. And it's a great way to go, particularly who's someone who's been struggling with like chronic digestive symptoms or skin conditions. Of course, there are other things we can try as well. That's not necessarily accessible to everybody, but best thing to do, as I've said a number of times, is just get in touch. We can do Zoe and Gemma can do an initial call to start with. You do consultations without testing, you do testing, which also includes the consultation.
Yeah.
So,
and we sometimes do things where we've done like SIBO testing and somebody's down the line of they've been to the GP, they're waiting for gastro appointment, but they do some testing with us and then they're going to take that to the gastro consultant just to speed up the processes. If they do need a certain, say, if they do have SIBO, there is an antibiotic option, so then they can go with results. So it's, yeah, we could certainly like work alongside as well.
Yeah. So appreciate you sticking with us for this long. Are there any questions at this stage? Appreciate it's getting a little bit late and we've covered a lot, but if anybody has got any questions at this stage, feel free to type them in, or we can obviously pick up offline as well. I'll just give it a minute or so just in case anybody has, but then just to say that I'll follow up as well. I can probably, it won't be tomorrow. I always say I'll follow up and then I'll send an email tomorrow, but it'll probably be more towards the end of the week, Friday, Saturday. We'll follow up with an email. We've talked about an awful lot of products there, so we probably won't include all of the product links. Maybe we'll include a few key ones, but the main thing would be we'll include the link in there if you want to book a health review, because I think it's so personalized when it comes to the digestive system, that we can do that free chat with anybody just to give some more suggestions. Anything else, Zoe? We covered anything you're sat there thinking that we've missed along the way? I think we've pretty much
very comprehensive.
Covered digestion in 75 minutes.
Yeah, I think so.
A lot of words. So thank you again for joining us, and we will let you know what the next session will be. Any requests, of course, send them through. Probably be a couple of months' time. I think doing one a month is a little bit hard going when we're doing stuff in the clinics, but I would say ideally we'll do one every sort of couple of months, won't we? Yeah. Fabulous. Oh, thank you so much for joining. Thanks for the comments there.
Thanks, girls. It was brilliant as always.
Thanks, thank you for listening.
See you soon in the shop. Bye.
Yeah,
bye.
Thanks so much. Bye. Bye. Thank you.